graduated last May, and somehow I'm still here giving this lecture to you. Very happy to do it. Kristen asked me to come back. And then before I came here to do my master's in public health, I completed my PhD in nutritional biochemistry at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And most of my PhD thesis and the research that I focus on is global health work. So I'm here today to talk about applied cultural competency, and then we'll go over a few examples to kind of illustrate the importance of cultural competency in interventions and in the success of interventions. So to start off, what is culture, since that's what we're going to be talking about a lot today? Culture is defined technically as the combination of knowledge, beliefs, and behaviors that are often specific to ethnic, racial, geographic, or social groups. Okay, that's kind of the textbook definition. An easier way to think about culture is it's what a group of people consider to be common sense, right? So when I say common sense, what I mean is you don't really have to think about things that seem right or wrong in the context of the group of people that you're with. It just seems really natural. That's what culture is. So to kind of walk us through examples of how different cultures are and how we perceive different cultures before we dive on into cultural competency, we're going to do a little exercise. So here I have a picture of a tribe from Africa. I've done a lot of work in Africa, so this picture seemed the best for me to show to you guys. So you look at this picture and you could recognize right away that this culture is different from the culture that you live in, right? So there's a lot of questions you might immediately have looking at this picture that might give you more clues about their culture, or questions that you might want to ask these people to better understand what their culture is, what their daily life is, and how it might be best for you to behave if you went to their culture, right? So let's look at this picture. We could have questions about why the women are wearing their hair in the way that they are. Is this structure that they're sitting in a house? Or is it some other kind of structure? Why do we only see women in this picture and no men? Why are they sitting on the ground? What's the significance of this doll here? What's the significance of the beads in the child's hair? Why are the women not wearing clothes on the top of their bodies, but they are on the bottom of their bodies, right? So those are all things we might ask when we see this picture. So it's really easy for us to immediately identify this as other, right? So I want you to imagine me traveling all the way to meet with these women and showing them this picture, okay? They might have a lot of questions about what's going on here, but you guys all in this room immediately know what's going on, right? Of course, this is some kind of sporting event at Cal, but if I went there and showed this picture to the women, they might look at this and say, why do these people seem to be yelling? Are they getting ready to go to war? Is there some kind of tribal activity going on? Why do they seem so excited? What's the significance of these colors and symbols on their chests? Why are the men completely naked on top but the woman is not? Why are there so many people in one place? Why is everybody so young looking, right? They might have all of these questions. And we don't really have those questions because we know exactly what's going on, because this represents something that happens within the context of our culture. So the point of this exercise is to show you guys that it goes both ways, right? We see things through the lens that is our culture, as do other people. So you have to be really conscious of that when you're traveling to other places and working in other countries and settings. So I think it kind of makes sense, given the exercise that we just did, to make this next statement, which is that culture impacts beliefs and belief systems, right, just generally. But today we're going to talk about health and nutrition, so it really impacts what cultures perceive as right when it comes to health, disease, and the delivery of health services. So here I have two contrasting images, and this shows us what we would consider a medical approach here, right? This is our biomedical Western model, where if somebody has a disease, we try to treat it with drugs or surgery or other kind of interventions that act directly on the problem. Versus, here's a Navajo medicine man, and what he's doing here is creating a picture that rebalances spirits and health within the body. Okay, so these two ways of intervening on health could not be more different, right? And we might say from the lens of our own culture that would not be effective. However, you have to really think about why they're doing this, what this means to the person who would be sick, right? This could feel very healing to that person within the context of their own culture. So often when working on global health projects, you really have to think about the culture that you're going into and what they find acceptable, so that you just don't show up with something that A, terrifies them, or B, that they would totally reject or is very dismissive of the beliefs that they already hold, because that's not going to be very well accepted. So I have some definitions up here. Does anybody want to read the first one for me? Cultural humility, in a very loud voice so everyone can hear. We'll sit here in silence. Okay, here you go.
Cultural humility, the ability of a person to maintain an interpersonal stance that is open to other ways of life in relation to aspects of cultural identity that are most important to the person.
Okay, does anybody want to restate that in simpler words? Come on, guys. Go ahead.
I guess just being open to other ways of life.
Yeah, so you kind of have to have your own self-awareness to know that you're coming from one culture and be open to and aware of another culture and humble to that, right? Open to understanding why they're doing what they're doing and wanting to work within the context of their culture to really have an impact, right? So can somebody read the definition of cultural competency? Thanks.
The delivery of health services that are respectful of and responsive to the health beliefs, practices, and cultural and linguistic needs of diverse populations.
Right. Okay. So really, these two things are very linked in that you can't have cultural competency or deliver services that are appropriate to a culture that you're working with if you can't practice cultural humility, right? And I will tell you from my experience that cultural humility is really something that necessitates what I'm going to call in situ experience, where you have to kind of be there and dive in and just kind of immerse yourself and be really open, because things are so subtle in different cultures that sometimes you're offending somebody and you don't even realize it. So it really is something that takes a lot of time, and it can be a big challenge to global health work, but really the relationships you establish determine the success of projects often. So I'm going to share an example with you guys from my PhD thesis. I spent about 6 months living in rural Zambia to facilitate a feeding study. And I'm going to talk to you guys not so much about the sciencey part of it, but about what we did to set up this study for the study's success, and then how that translated to the overall success of the intervention as we tried to scale it up. So I studied vitamin A deficiency for my PhD thesis. Vitamin A deficiency is one of the major micronutrient deficiencies in the world. It's actually the third leading micronutrient deficiency, and it impacts over 200 women and children across the globe. It is the leading cause of preventable blindness in children, and many children, after they lose their eyesight, don't survive that year. So it's a big deal, and something that many different groups of people are working on trying to solve and alleviate. The most common method that we use to try to lessen vitamin A deficiency is high-dose supplementation, which is what this picture is up here. It's a little capsule with oil and vitamin A in it that you just squeeze into the child's mouth. So vitamin A is a fat-soluble vitamin, which means it stores in your body. So when you give children doses that are really high, there is some risk associated with that. So an alternative way we could alleviate vitamin A deficiency is what I was working on for my project, and it involved using plant foods like this very orange maize down here, orange corn, that were grown to have a lot more beta carotene. Beta carotene is a molecule that your body can take and convert into vitamin A, and you don't have any risk of negative side effects with it. So ideally, if you could get children and mothers to start eating this orange maize, you could really just change their diet and not need to mess with supplements. and there would be no health risks associated with it. So this process of developing crops that have really intense amounts of micronutrients in it is called biofortification. The famous example of biofortification is golden rice. Has anybody ever heard of that? So that one got a lot of press because it was a GMO, a genetically modified organism. The crops that I worked with weren't, but really both exist and both are safe, and both really have been shown to have positive impacts on child health. So just so you know. So why did we choose orange maize as an intervention in Zambia? We chose this because their main staple food is white maize, okay? Just to give you an idea of how much white maize exists in Africa, it accounts for 90% of all the maize grown on the continent of Africa, and for children living in poor areas, it's more than 70% of their daily calories. So this white maize contains basically nothing but carbohydrates and some protein, but it's not a complete protein. So it's really concerning when you see children eating so many calories from something that's not delivering a lot of essential nutrients to them. And just another way to think about this, the average person in Zambia consumes about 130 kilograms of maize each year. So that's a lot of maize. And they use it, they grind it up and they make it into this kind of white porgy mush. They call it ensima, and they dip that into relishes. So they do have some vegetables and things like that in their diet, but it's really more as a garnish or something that adds flavor to the ensima that they're eating. And there's an adorable child, terrified of the picture that's being taken. So to get our study rolling and to get this project off the ground, where we started was engaging all of the stakeholders that would be involved in the project. And this, of course, included the target communities that we wanted to work with. So from the very beginning of us having developed this maize and wanting to intervene in an area, we had selected target groups and we worked with those groups as part of our study, okay? So they were involved in the planning, they were involved in helping us pick sites for the study. So they really felt like they were part of what we were doing from the beginning, an essential part of what we were doing. So there's lots of stakeholders that you could talk about when you're thinking of studies. For international studies, and for this study in particular, we had the funders, right? The people who had shelled out all this money to develop biofortified maize and wanted to make sure it was working. We have plant breeders who worked to develop the specific kind of maize that not only had a high amount of vitamin A, but that had characteristics that were pleasing to the farmers who would be growing it, and that would be pest resistant to that area. So that's a process that takes about 10 to 20 years, depending on what crop you're working with. So it's a very long time to develop that. We had nutritional scientists like me who went there, organized people, trained staff to actually carry out the assessment of whether or not this vitamin A maize could improve child health. And then, of course, we had the government and policymakers. We worked with 2 governmental groups in Zambia. We worked with their National Nutrition Coalition, and then we also worked with a group called the Tropical Disease Research Center, and they helped us do all of our biochemical testing. And then, of course, we had the target communities. But I want to talk a little bit more about having the support of the government because it really made our study happen. The government went to these rural communities and they did over a year of community level sensitization, which tended to be in the form of theatrical reenactments of what we would be doing during the study. So the hardest thing in our study is that we took blood samples, which is a very touchy thing, especially when you're taking blood from a child. So there's a lot of fear around that, a lot of superstition. And because we had the government support and we had them with us helping to teach the communities what we were doing, it really made a big difference in how we were accepted. And then with the Tropical Disease Research Center, we had their support because they were actually the ones taking the blood samples. So that went over a lot better than having a bunch of white faces showing up poking their children, right? People that they wouldn't recognize. Some of the children, when they saw us, would just start crying. They thought we were monsters. So it really went over a lot better to have the government there and government groups there supporting the work that we were doing. And just a note on working with target communities in developing countries, they often have meetings, but they can go like 8 hours. So you really have to be patient and committed to answering all their questions and being really transparent with what they're doing to have a good relationship and make things move forward. So it's just a very time-intensive process, but really, once you have the support of those target communities in your study, you've already created a base of people who are more accepting of your intervention and who can be advocates for you as you move forward. So time-consuming, but very, very important. Just a few more details about our study. We picked a total of 6 villages that were in the poorest area of Zambia. So we enrolled about 300 children total. Even though our 6 villages were really close together, there's not always roads places, so it could take us more than 2 hours to get someplace that was probably less than 2 miles away. So very challenging. And then at each site, we had Zambian nutritionists and school teachers who oversaw the running of things at the site level, weighed out the food waste so we can really figure out how much vitamin A each child was getting and how many overall nutrients they were getting. And then what we did was we hired the mothers of the children, and they were the child care supervisors and the cooks. So they got to see exactly what was happening at every site every day. So they were very confident that there was no funny business going on. They got to eat, they were paid, so it boosted the economic benefit to their families. So that was really important too in helping our study be successful and allowing the community to feel like part of what was going on. As I said, we had to attend community meetings regularly, which was really hard, and really to emphasize the importance of having that government support in drawing our blood sample. It was huge. To give you a contrasting example, there was a group from another university, I won't say which one, who was just traveling through the countryside doing a malaria sample. For that, you take a little finger prick, you do a slide so you can count the parasites. So it's a very small amount of blood. They didn't have the support of the government in the way that we did, where they had advocates there with them, and they were literally chased out of villages and threatened. So it made a big difference for us to have that support there. And luckily, through these studies, we were able to show that this biofortified maize did have a positive benefit on the children and was in fact as effective as these high-dose vitamin A supplements. So really, it demonstrated the possibility of an alternative way to improve vitamin A status. It could also have some economic benefit to the households who grow this maize if it's adopted and accepted widely. So there's some real potential benefits of this. Go ahead. Yep, I said at the beginning, you can use, so biofortification is just a term that means you're creating a crop that has more nutrients in it, whether that's vitamin A or iron or zinc or sometimes even certain proteins. But you can use either traditional plant breeding or GMO. And it really isn't a matter of like picking either one. It depends on what characteristic you want to put in the crop. So for example, with golden rice, you use GMO because rice naturally doesn't have any variation in producing vitamin A or beta carotene, whereas corn does. You see lots of types of yellow corn. So GMO is necessary for rice, but not necessary for corn, and they take about the same amount of time to develop. So that's a great question. So then, after our study showed that it was successful, they rolled out the maize, which means it became commercially available to farmers, particularly rural farmers in Zambia. And the way that they did that was really important to beginning to expose people to it and gain acceptance. And they were very sensitive to using culturally appropriate marketing. Here, Mfasto means love. A harvest of love is what they call the corn. So they're really priming this as like, oh, if you love your children, you'll feed them this orange corn. Here we have a healthy looking mother and her child feeding her baby this orange corn. And then to help farmers figure out what variety they were most interested in, they used different African animals to describe the characteristics of the crops. So monkey would be small ears of corn, but they grew really fast. Zebra would be medium-sized, it took a medium amount of time to grow, and then elephant would be large ears but slower to grow. And that was something that was easier for farmers to kind of pick up and adapt. So there's still this question of whether or not biofortified maize will be widely adopted by Zambians, because that change in color is a very big deal, right? It's like if all of a sudden I told you you could only eat blue French fries for the rest of your life, right? You might be a little leery of that because you are used to eating like white French fries or orange sweet potato fries. So there is this long period that's necessary to educate people and have them accept a different kind of crop. However, including local communities really makes a big difference in that acceptance. And it creates this in it together mentality that kind of puts everybody on the same page and allows everybody to kind of share in that benefit of improving children's health, which is a big deal and people get very excited about that. And of course, just to emphasize that cultural competency in this study was really paramount to it happening, and to us maintaining positive relationships with the communities we worked with so we could build capacity as we move forward for biofortified maize and future studies. So the next kind of intervention that I'm going to talk about, which Kristen talked a little bit about, is conditional cash transfers. Has anybody ever heard about this before? Yeah? Okay, so they're kind of contentious. Some people think they're really great, and some people are pretty hesitant about them. Do you guys have any ideas about what might cause that feeling of hesitancy? Go ahead.
You're pretty much telling people who are in need exactly what they need to get better, and what if they need to like fund that money into certain like household equipment or like even just finding I don't know, it's just like very limiting and like superiority complex.
Yes, so we call that paternalistic. So it's the same way sometimes you'll hear discussions about food stamps in America and limiting what people can buy as being paternalistic. It's the government, or however you want to think about it, more educated people or people in positions of power telling poorer people what they should and shouldn't do or should and shouldn't put in their bodies. And some people, go ahead.
Doesn't that create dependency? I mean, once they don't have that cash, they can't purchase that themselves.
Well, the idea with this is, I think the idea is that you're kind of mobilizing people out of poverty, and hopefully by improving nutrition and health, they can take advantage of more opportunities. So you're kind of helping them climb the ladder. But other than the example I'm going to talk about, I'm not aware of any like long-term conditional cash transfer programs. So that might be something that kind of has yet to be seen. But the idea is you're mobilizing people up and out of poverty, so that eventually maybe they don't need these cash transfers. But so just to summarize what Kristen said before, a conditional cash transfer is when you give somebody money in exchange for them demonstrating a specific behavior. So often in global health contexts, this is them investing in the health and well-being of their child, or investments in maternal health so that children that those mothers produce are healthier. And how often they measure whether or not people are compliant is determined by like the number of doctor's visits or the days in school or things like that that are measurable, so they can say you completed X and now you get your cash transfer. So why conditional cash transfers? It's just because in general, people know what's right, but they don't do it anyway. This is certainly true when we look at condom use across the globe. And just as a simpler example, like flossing your teeth, I'm sure many of you in this room, we won't do a show of hands, go to your dentist and are told to floss, and then you don't do it when you go home. But there's this kind of motivational gap that exists, right? Like you know you should be doing something, you know it's safer, but you might just say, well, I haven't used condoms this far and I haven't gotten any diseases, right? So I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing even though I know it would be safer if I used condoms, right? It's kind of that mentality. So the whole point of conditional cash transfers is that they're addressing that motivational gap that you're experiencing, giving you a little bit more motivation so that you're actually follow through with the healthier behavior. for conditional cash transfers to be successful, we really have to think about some basic supply and demand principles here. So the supply is the services, right? If you don't have enough doctors to see all the children in an area, a conditional cash transfer program won't work, right? Or if you don't have enough specific food staples that you want the family to eat that are healthy available, it's not going to work because people can't meet the terms of the conditional cash transfer even if they want to. And then to create the demand, really that's what the cash transfers are doing, right? So you're making sure people want to go use those services because they're going to get that incentive. And then hopefully the outcomes are better health, children that are healthier and develop better, and then children that go to school so they have higher or bigger potential in their life after they are done. So a specific example of this is Oportunidades, which is a program, a conditional cash transfer program that was launched in Mexico in 2002. And the goal was to help poor families access basic services and to incentivize that behavior more. And then the specific outcomes that were measured were related to child health, indicators of poverty, and sometimes school attendance. And just to give you an idea of how much was offered as a conditional cash transfer, it would be about $11 to maybe $70-ish for education, and then about $16 each month for nutritious food and supplements if you met those check-ins of going to the doctor and keeping your kid in school. And incentives were often bigger for families if they allowed their daughters to go to school and to the doctor, because often you see girls being kept at home more often than male children. So did it work? That is the question. We saw that the amount of time children spent in school increased. We saw this number of sick days that children had decrease, so that was very positive. You saw decreased levels of stunting and wasting, which is what Kristen gave the extreme examples of with marasmus and kwashiorkor. So we started seeing children that were the appropriate height for their age and the appropriate weight for their age. We saw lower risk of children being obese, which is a big concern in Mexico. They have one of the highest prevalences of diabetes in the world. We also saw improved development for the children. They had improved cognition. They were more skilled with language. Mothers felt better. Okay, we saw lower rates of maternal depression, and then generally there were just lower feelings of stress in the children. So overall, this was very positive. And I just want to point out that because this was a government program, everybody you see here kind of looks like the populations that they're working with, which allowed a lot of trust to be built. So I would say overall that this was a pretty big success. This is actually a program that is still ongoing in Mexico, and really it's continued to be viewed as very positive and successful and used as a model for many other conditional cash transfer programs. However, as we talked about a little bit ago, it's still a relatively young program, so how it will fare long term is a good question, and whether it creates dependency is a good question and something that will have to be looked at. However, really the outcomes that we're seeing are very, very positive at this point. So to close up, I hope I convinced you guys that cultural competency is a really big deal and important thing to make sure you cover if you're doing global health work, and that to really do this, you have to engage with the target populations you want to work with, and really make sure they feel like part of the team that you're working on to change the situation, and that you're really respectful of what they feel like they need to gain from the intervention, and consider that in your work, the work that you're doing. So we have about 5 minutes left. If you guys have questions for me, I'm open to taking them. If you guys are interested